effects of global warming on our climate is no longer an inconvenient truth, but a harsh reality. And the only known solution is to reduce the amount of CO2 being released into the atmosphere caused by burning fossil fuel.
KLM 1919 is cleared for takeoff.
The aviation industry has taken up the challenge and has turned to an unexpected source in nature to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Would it affect the airline price?
And it's safe.
It's controversial.
Well, I suppose in terms of sustainability, it would obviously be the better choice.
The aviation industry moves over 2.4 billion people each year. It also pumps 700 million tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change. But those emissions are actually relatively minor compared to other industry sectors, like electricity generation and ground transport.
And these industries have viable alternative energy sources. The power generation industry can look to wind, hydro, nuclear, and solar technologies to make electricity without producing much CO2. Cars and buses can run on hybrid, flexible fuel engines or electricity. Electric-powered trains can replace diesel locomotives.
South African Airways is committed to being the most environmentally sustainable airline group in the world. So one of the only ways to actually reduce our carbon footprint is to change the type of fuel that we use and the way that we use the fuel. So we're using biofuels and we're using them in blends with conventional fossil fuels. So we don't need to change engines or anything like that. And one day we actually hope to be able to use 100% biofuel on our engines.
Now, we've heard this story about biofuels before, with ethanol produced from corn competing for land with food crops. And that was actually driving food prices up and contributing to deforestation and even water pollution. Now, how is this different?
This is a second generation biofuel. So we had the first round of biofuels that were environmentally, sustainably speaking, a disaster. Now we're in the second round of crops which are more sustainable, number one. Number two, we have sustainability standards. So SAA in particular is subscribed to the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. So everything that we do has to be certified as sustainable. So we are growing a crop called Solaris, which is a hybrid strain of tobacco. It has zero nicotine in it, so you cannot actually be used for smoking. It has very well developed seed pods with small leaves, so we can't use it for anything else except this. And we process that, and we are currently busy with the first crop that we've planted, and we are processing and harvesting the seeds as we speak.
Once the crop has been harvested, it's cleaned, crushed, and separated into animal feed, tobacco oil, and biomass. The tobacco oil is further refined into jet fuel for blending.
Our trip out to Marble Hall demonstrates why dealing with climate change is so important. Extreme weather events are likely to become more and more common. And that's why crops like this are becoming so important.
The basic concept of burning fuels for energy stays the same, fossil fuel or biofuel. That doesn't matter. You still release CO2 emissions. The trick is that the CO2 that you release is being absorbed by the plants that are grown. Then you turn the plants into the biofuel and you release it. So you make a cycle. It's not a net reduction of CO2 because you don't absorb it and it's stored. It's a balance, so you don't release additional CO2 into the atmosphere. With fossil fuel, you take stored CO2 that's been there for a long time, you pull it out of the ground, and then you turn it into fuel, and you release CO2 into the atmosphere, but it's not absorbed again. So the whole idea of biofuels is that it's a cycle.
So this 51 hectares is going to approve the business plan. So we're going to go over the process, so we're going to make a harvest, we're going to crush the seed, and we're going to produce biojet fuel.
The seed pods are harvested by hand and then laid out to dry. The minute seeds are then removed from the pods, and the pods are turned into high-protein animal feed. The seeds are compressed to extract the oil. Before this is refined into biofuel.
From 1 ton of seed, we have 330 kilo of oil and 660 kilo of cake. So the cake is good in protein and fatty acid, so it's very good for feed animal. From 1 hectare, you can fly a Cape Town jobber flight using to boil.
So SAA and Sky Energy have very ambitious plans for this crop. What do you hope the economic and the community impacts will be?
Right. So what we've seen in the region, together with the project development partners, Suncam, is that there's a lot of underutilized land in South Africa, but also in Limpopo province. Next to that, there's a high unemployment rate. So we position this as additional revenue for the small farmers, smallholder farmers, community farmers, also small commercial and commercial farmers. We don't want to take over whole farms and only plant Solaris, right? It has to have additional revenue generation potential for the farming communities.
Like now, we started a small with 2 hectares, and then we created 6 permanent jobs, and then our aim is to grow and increase this Solaris project into 20 hectares so that we can create more than 20 permanent workers to our communities.
It's additional income. From a regional point of view, it's rural development, it's socioeconomic development, job creation, utilizing land that's currently laying fallow. It's making the whole system a lot more efficient from both an economic as well as a social point of view.
In the early days of the jet age, speed and luxury were the drivers of intercontinental travel. Today, engines are on the cutting edge of efficiency, and aircraft are lighter and more aerodynamic than ever before.
We have made enormous strides in fuel consumption in the engine design, but we haven't reached the limits. Some of us, those of us that are engineers, also by educational, well, there's never a limit. We can always do better. But we think we are in an area of right now diminishing returns. And the world and in general, the planet in general, is demanding more and more reductions in carbon emissions and fuel consumption.
Aviation has made great strides in improving the aerodynamic design of aircraft. The wing of the 787 is indisputably the most efficient in the air. Fuel consumption is reduced by a whopping 22% through a combination of aerodynamic design and the use of new materials like carbon fiber and innovative engine technology.
So Boeing has a variety of projects. This just happens to be one. We have probably about 25 different projects around the world trying to find different alternatives of fuel for the airplanes. We have already had numerous test flights, one-of-a-kinds, etc. We have already had several airlines that have been flying regularly with blends of jet fuel and biofuel. We have some airlines ready to see what's going to happen here and SAA is probably will be the number one. And anything we can do with the use of this fuel to reduce fuel consumption, to reduce carbon emissions, is goodness for the industry. It lowers the airline costs.
Look, in the last 100 years, we've seen a rapid change and evolution in underlying technology in the aviation space. Whether we talk airframe technology, the use of composite materials, different types of engine technologies and evolution, all of this has helped propel aviation into what is today a $700 billion industry per annum. The one area where we have not seen this rapid rate of innovation is in the use of fossil fuels as the primary means of energy generation for aircraft. So biofuels, therefore, is the next logical step. We keep on investing in design with the law of diminishing returns basically being applicable to engine technologies and airframes. But more can be done now by investing in biofuels. We do honestly see this as the next paradigm shift, and we hope that biofuels makes that real step change, making aviation a much more responsible contributor to the global economy, as well as the environment in which we operate.
What's the timetable for the rollout?
So SA is looking to produce 20 million litres of biofuel by the end of 2017, and ultimately we're looking for 500 million litres of biofuel by the end of 2023 to replace our jet fuel. Global aviation has acknowledged that aviation is part of the problem when it comes to global warming. So we know that we have to actually do something to ensure that we can reduce our carbon footprint and fly more sustainably for the planet. That's where we came up with the tagline that flying shouldn't cost the earth.
And that's what an international initiative, the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, aims to ensure: the sustainability of biomaterials production and processing.
So when you are looking at sustainability, what are some of the principles that you examine?
So we would look at things like the importance of conservation areas that are adjacent to a farm. We'd look at the history. Was it natural vegetation cleared to put the farm in place? Was that natural vegetation actually important, in terms of biodiversity? So we would look at that complete history. From a food security perspective, we would look firstly at, is the area food insecure generally? First step, if it is, then we would require the operation to improve the food security or the food availability in the local area.
Aviation has made huge improvements in air traffic control efficiency, how aircraft are flown, and in developing more environmentally friendly operations at airports. The history of aviation is marked by people achieving extraordinary things despite the conventional wisdom of the time telling them it couldn't be done. Let's hope history will record biofuel as another extraordinary aviation achievement.